After the stumbles we told you about Friday, Senator John McCain today clarified his controversial remarks about war and oil. Our third story tonight, it is official now. If you elect President McCain, he promises he'll make absolutely sure he doesn't have any reason to wage war over oil. Thanks. Following up from his accidental confession Friday that the U.S. sent its troops to Iraq for oil, Mr. McCain today said he will, quote, make sure that U.S. dependence on Mideast oil is eliminated so it would never be, quote, a reason for us to be in a conflict in the Middle East. And while that might make a real snappy bumper sticker, it just happens to violate fellow Republican Senator Jon Kyle's caveat in an op-ed today saying, quote, we must never make it appear as if we went into Iraq for its oil. Now you tell him. Of course, McCain did have some warning not to use the word jihadists, as he did also today, less than 2 weeks after the State Department told U.S. officials never to use that term because it legitimizes terrorists in the eyes of the Muslim world. Language, a continuing problem for Mr. McCain today. He also launched his Spanish version website, Cinco de Mayo, today, of course, after his Democratic rivals had theirs up. Also 2 years after Senator McCain himself voted to make English the national official language of the United States, which would mean Spanish wasn't. At this point, let's turn to Matt Taibbi, the author of The Great Derangement, a terrifying true story of war, politics, and religion at the twilight of the American empire. He's also contributing editor at Rolling Stone. Matt, good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
He doesn't know who the enemy is. He's a little bit fuzzy on whether we have or we would make war for oil, and foreign policy is his strength. I'm missing something here.
Well, I mean, I don't think he's confused about whether or not we're going there for oil. I think he's confused about whether or not he wants to admit that we're going there for oil. So he shouldn't hold that against him. And as for, him not knowing, whether Al-Qaeda is Sunni or Shiite, well, I mean, Bush didn't know what was the difference between the two, and look how well that worked out, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we wouldn't have this show today.
Right, exactly.
The Spanish language appeal today, and again, 2 years after a vote, a fairly controversial vote, that perhaps has its own merits, but a vote that said English is the official language of the United States, meaning that others like Spanish would not be the official language of the United States. Is there, again, I'm missing something. Is there an inconsistency here, or does the McCain campaign and Mr. McCain himself not see that as a problem?
Well, I think it's only, on the contrary, I think it's entirely consistent with everything that John McCain has ever done. I mean, he's basically changed his mind about pretty much every position that he's ever held. I think you'd have to search far and wide to find something that he hasn't changed his mind about. He's made a career out of actually voting against bills that bear his name. There was the McCain-Feingold Shays Meehan bill, which he opposed a couple of years ago. There's his own immigration bill, which he opposed. There's all kinds of things, like he called Jerry Falwell an agent of intolerance, and then a few years later he's hamming it up, speaking at Liberty University, Bob Jones University. I mean, there's one thing after the other with this guy.
Does this distract us from evaluating him fairly because we spend all of our time trying to figure out which his latest position is on a particular topic? I mean, this point that Lindsey Graham made the other day, that you can't, right. McCain is so different than George Bush. His quote was, good luck making him into George Bush. We just found out this past week that McCain's campaign talks with top White House officials every day. That's another kind of inconsistency in those two positions.
Well, I would actually disagree. Okay. I think the worst thing about George Bush was that he had convictions. I mean, I think it was the things that he actually believed in that got us into the most trouble. Whereas John McCain is a guy has been aptly demonstrated all throughout the course of his career. He'll change his mind at the drop of a hat. He's a cynic as opposed to a true believer, and I think in these times I'll take the cynic any time.
So being able to bring John Hagee aboard and say, well, I'm opposed to all those things in which he expressed any kind of anti-everything opinion. That sort of generic quality to him is a good thing, that there's no utter conviction to the man?
Well, I mean, I think you just have to look at him for what he is. He's a politician. I mean, you could look at the Spanish language thing. I think we all understand that he'd put out a website in Esperanto if it was going to get him any votes. We shouldn't hold that against him. We should just recognize him for what he is. He's a creature running for the presidency of the United States, and they all do this. So I think it's, in some degree, it's actually refreshing after the Bush administration to see this kind of moral vacillation.
But when it gets to a point that McCain's staff gave Bush a heads up, or at least the administration, not the president personally, that he was going to slam him on Katrina during the start of the campaign just a few weeks ago. And days after that, Bush made the joke about McCain's not here because he wants to distance himself. If they're both in on the joke, who are they laughing at?
I don't know. I find that whole situation completely mystifying, that they're even joking at all after what happened in South Carolina in 2000. You know, Bush's people put out all that stuff about McCain having an illegitimate child by a black prostitute and all of that, and now all of a sudden they're joking with each other. I mean, that just tells you about what kind of people they both are.
Well, see, but now I have you, because everything changed after 9/11. So there you go.
There you go.
All right.
Absolutely.
Matt Taibbi of Rolling Stone, author of The Great Derangement. Thank you for coming in. Good to see you, sir.